March 6, 1944, Anzio Beachhead, Italy. A damp coastal mist clings low over churned fields, erasing distance, hiding everything beyond 50 yards. Corporal James Halperin, 24, sits in the cramped driver's seat of a Sherman M4A1. Metal presses close around him. The engine breathes slow heat through the steel floor, restrained under strict command. Stand down, conserve fuel. Await coordination orders. He listens to the idle hum, steady and contained. Each vibration a reminder that this machine is meant to move, not wait. Inside the tank, breath fogs on the metal walls before melting into thin lines of water. Halperin wipes his glove across one patch, clearing only a smear. Beyond the narrow periscope slits, nothing moves. Just the gray wash of morning weather swallowing the front line. Somewhere ahead, the 45th Infantry Division presses forward without armor support, separated by fog and silence. Boots in mud, rifles carried into the unknown. The radio crackles. A clipped voice repeats the standing order. No movement without armor support approval. No exceptions. Static follows, thick and incomplete. Halperin adjusts the dial, catching only fragments, reports of German anti-tank guns, uncertain bearings, men raising concerns that vanish mid-transmission. The fog turns every warning into rumor. The gunfire ahead changes. It sharpens. Short bursts at first, then a longer rattle. A shout bleeds through the mist. Not a command, a scream, the kind that drops at the end. Halperin stiffens. He knows the range. He knows that infantry out there now face something more precise than small arms. The kind of threat that turns a quiet field into a kill zone. He checks the fuel gauge. A slow tick downward just from idling. The machine feels impatient. The tracks, still caked in frozen beach sand, hold a forward pull. He can feel it through the seat. Power unused becomes tension. And tension grows. His crew waits with him. Loader breathing slow behind. Gunner tapping one finger against the elevation wheel. They follow orders. They stay still. But they hear the same distant struggle. They understand the clock moving without them. Another message arrives. The same one. Do not advance. Halperin stares at the throttle. Black steel, cold under the glove. His knuckles tighten. He thinks of the road behind them. Trucks carrying crates of ammunition, fuel drums strapped upright, medics in soft-sided ambulances holding for permission. A supply chain paused mid-pulse. In war, machines are built to keep rhythm. A convoy stalled as a heartbeat skipped. Another scream reaches them. Short. Cut off. Halperin's jaw shifts. Orders exist to protect men, but orders can also leave them to be found later, tagged and loaded under new silence. He feels sweat break along his shoulders despite the cold. He leans forward, 1 inch. He waits for someone else to act first. No one does. The fog hides the front line, but it cannot hide the truth forming inside the steel walls. Waiting may kill more soldiers than advancing. His foot lowers. The engine deepens. Tracks tense. A rule is about to break. Quietly. Before the war, James Halperin worked maintenance on turbines at a steel plant in Pittsburgh. The factory floor offered structure. Conveyor belts moved with purpose. Steam valves hissed in steady rhythm. He learned to read machines the way others read people. A shift in vibration warned him sooner than a supervisor's inspection ever could. He trusted the hum of engines. Promises from managers did not carry the same certainty. His life followed pattern. Cleaning metal, greasing fittings, checking gauges twice before trusting the first reading. When the plant went quiet at night, he would walk the line and listen to the silence of well-kept systems. Precision calmed him. Repetition kept doubt contained. He believed a flawless machine showed respect for the workers who relied on it. Military service replaced the factory with a Sherman M4A1. The smell of hot steel followed him. The radial engine behind his seat became the new turbine. He He cleaned the tank's controls with the same methodical motions he once used on the plant's switches. He wiped each surface until it reflected back a faint outline of his glove. Crew members joked he talked to gears. He never denied it. A tank that ran smooth kept men alive. Inside the steel hull, his senses sharpened into habit. He counted sounds without thinking. 9 cylinders cycling in a tight circle. Tracks settling against earth, each segment a small clank. The faint expansion creak when the engine warmed. The hull breathed. He listened to that breath. A machine, alive in purpose. Routine gave him focus. Focus gave his crew confidence. Their trust mattered more than rank. Officers issued orders. Halperin carried men. He valued the difference. Home was different now. His father, once a mill hand, lost work when the Depression shut the plant. Illness kept his younger brother from enlisting. Responsibility shifted to Halperin the day he signed enlistment papers. The Army gave him a uniform. The tank gave him something else: space to control, maintain, understand. 30 tons of moving steel became his answer to chaos. Keep it running. Keep it moving. Keep men safe. Some soldiers craved glory. Halperin preferred certainty. He looked for clues in machinery, not speeches. The battlefield forced change, but habit remained his anchor. He checked bolts twice. He listened for misfires before the gunner noticed. He tapped gauges when the reading felt wrong. His crew learned the quiet signals. A shorter breath, a longer pause, before he announced a concern aloud. In Pittsburgh, timing meant production. Here, timing meant survival. He watched others laugh at caution. Some mocked routine as fear disguised. He ignored them. War punished the careless long before the brave. And when laughter returned this morning, disbelief at waiting while infantry moved blind, Halperin felt the same pressure he once felt in the factory when a turbine ran hotter than it should. A warning, a decision point. Fog covered the field ahead. Orders insisted on stillness. But 30 tons of industry did not exist to idle. Tracks were forged to move forward. Steel resisted patience. Halperin sat ready, engine prepared, hands calm. Routine aligned with defiance. He believed the tank's true purpose was motion. Forward motion. Forward is where men needed him. Would you have trusted the engine over the order? Every vehicle behind Halperin's tank is a lung for the soldiers ahead. Ammunition crates stacked in wooden ribs. Fuel drums strapped upright like sealed oxygen. A convoy built to breathe war into the front line. When the system moves, the battalion lives. When it stalls, the front suffocates. At Anzio, that breath is shallow. The beachhead lies pressed against the sea. A fragile pocket waiting to be punctured. German artillery holds the high ground. Each shell fired from above reminds every man here that the enemy sees more than they do. Timetables hold chaos in control. Arrive 15 minutes late, and riflemen count their last cartridges by touch. Arrive 30 minutes late, and medics fold gauze into wounds that require more than fabric and pressure. War reduces life into a schedule. The Sherman at the front is not celebrated for armor or firepower. Today it is the lead plate of a conveyor line, a delivery machine. 30 tons of movement pulling every truck behind it into relevance. Its tracks are the path that keeps supplies from sinking into the mud. If the tank halts, everything behind it freezes. Steel designed to advance becomes weight without purpose. Halperin listens to the radio again. Headquarters warns that armor cannot risk isolation. The order arrives clean. The risk is not. Somewhere in the mist, infantry push farther from ammunition, farther from fuel, farther from the medics waiting in the convoy. The distance grows without number. Fog hides the gap, but tension measures it accurately. He hears another artillery strike ahead, a low thump, then 2 more, the kind that precedes silence. He imagines soldiers flattening themselves against cold ground, helmets sinking into mud. He counts the seconds between impacts. The German guns are finding range. A tightening noose, A field turned into a blind corridor. The system asks for patience. The system requires confirmation. The system speaks with caution that protects hardware first. A halted tank avoids mechanical risk, yet each minute of delay increases human risk. Halperin feels that pressure gather inside like steam building behind a valve. He spent years watching gauges creep upward. Too much pressure and metal fails. A rupture punishes hesitation. Ground moisture lifts into low vapor behind his exhaust. The mist pulls away into faint curls, showing movement denied. This machine was meant to push. Engines idle with a pulse that expects release. He can feel the tension through his boots. A rhythm waiting to continue. Forward is necessary. Forward is duty. Halperin thinks of the convoy wheels behind him. Tires softened by the rain, axles heavy with ammunition. If the mud grips too long, the line may never restart. A single stalled tank can bury a day's lifeline for an entire battalion. He knows this. He was trained to know this, but training also reminds him that orders stand until they change. No one changes them. A distant scream tears through the mist again. Short, abrupt, not repeated. He looks at the periscope slit. Nothing visible, everything inevitable. The system prioritizes machines. But machines exist to protect the men who advance. A convoy without motion serves no one. The math on paper demands patience. The math in the mud demands action. Halperin places his hand on the throttle. Not tight, ready. He watches the fog inhale the exhaust. The heartbeat of the system waits for a single decision. Gunfire ahead shifts again. No longer scattered. It gathers into organized bursts, controlled by timing rather than panic. Halperin listens. He hears the difference. He has always trusted patterns. Chaos repeats only when someone directs it. Something ahead is positioned with intent. Through the periscope slit, shapes flash inside the fog. Not men moving, something dragged. A harsh metal scrape, low and deliberate, cuts through the damp morning. The soil trembles beneath the tank's steel floor plates. A vibration deep enough to bypass hearing. Heavy equipment being angled into place. A weapon designed to halt armor before it sees danger. A pack gun adjusts its stance long before the barrel aligns. The fog keeps secrets. It swallows anything beyond 50 yards. Halperin squints through a lens covered in condensation. Each breath he takes fogs the glass, then clears, revealing nothing. Only occasional flickers of contrast. A darker shadow moving where a ditch might lie. A fence post that vanishes before the mind decides what it was. A sparrow erupts from the mud in front of the tank. Its wings beat urgently, cutting a sharp path into the sky. Wildlife reacts before soldiers understand. Even a small creature knows the air has changed. Radio static hisses back to life, then severs abruptly into clean silence. No voices, no static, no fragments. A communications line drowned by terrain or masked by interference. Silence becomes confirmation that something manipulates the field. Inside the hull, the loader whispers a rumor. German Paquet crews were sighted this week, aligning kill zones along expected routes. Narrow silhouettes invisible until a flash marks intent. Men who saw them rarely reported full detail afterward. The rest of the crew stays quiet. The loader has voiced what they already fear. A distant concussion rolls across the mist. The periscope lens trembles. The vibration is faint yet unmistakable. Artillery calibrating distance. Every test round takes life as a data point. Halperin counts. One strike, pause, another. The interval shortens. The next will land where soldiers run. The infantry ahead start to withdraw, slipping back toward where they believe armor waits. But they pull back in uneven motions. Some fall without finishing the movement. Cries stretch and break as the wind changes direction. Men retreating without cover create an outline for the hidden guns. Halperin looks behind. The convoy's engines rev without instruction. Drivers tighten hands around steering wheels slick with nervous sweat. Trucks bump forward inches at a time, then stop, then move again. Fear of stillness overtakes discipline. The artery of movement twitches. A single strike could tear it open. Condensation trails rise from the tank's exhaust. The pattern is irregular now. The engine's idle strains slightly, sensing demand that leadership refuses to authorize. Pressure builds not only in machines, but in men forced to wait for danger to finish preparing. Halperin's jaw locks. The warnings accumulate too quickly. He feels the moment before rupture, same as he once felt in factory pipes ready to burst. He knows these signs. The system demands blindness. The field demands sight. Orders insist that caution saves lives. But each new clue proves the risk of obedience grows heavier. Metal scrapes again. Closer. Something hidden has finished its aim. Halperin leans forward, foot suspended above the throttle. Halperin's glove curls tighter around the throttle. The engine waits beneath him, heat building in measured pulses. He hears the lieutenant's voice crack over the radio again, firm and direct. Any armor that advances without command will face court-martial. No exceptions. The words strike with official certainty. They carry weight, but they do not carry men. Inside the hull, the loader shifts uneasily. The gunner keeps eyes fixed on the fog, hands hovering near the controls but unmoving. They know regulation. Unauthorized movement turns one decision into a tribunal case. Disobedience stains a record permanently. Halperin understands. Yet rules simplify only when danger stays visible. Fog removes clarity. Distance removes logic. The battlefield rarely waits for permission. Another burst of rifle fire cuts through the mist. Isolated. A single pattern. Then a scream longer than the rest. Halperin pauses his breath to listen. A man's voice, strained by pain, shifts into silence. He counts the seconds afterward. Silence holds more danger than sound. He lowers his eyes to the fuel gauge. It barely moves. The engine idles without demand. Steel warms in place. A tank that waits becomes predictable. Predictability on a battlefield is a target. Halperin remembers the factory. Turbines cooled too long would warp under sudden restart. Steam valves jammed under pressure spikes caused by inaction. He learned that constant movement protected the machine. Pause too long and failure built unseen. War runs under similar rules. Delay becomes hazard. Hesitation writes casualty lists. He thinks again of emergency maintenance he once performed without permission. A shutdown alert missed. Halperin intervened. Pressure released just before rupture. No medals, no reprimand. Just a quiet nod from a supervisor who understood one thing. The system survived because someone acted. Now the system is a battalion caught in fog. He hears artillery far ahead. Not random. Adjusted by short corrections. German gunners finding precise range. He imagines infantry pressing into mud. Helmets tilted. Hands searching for cover that does not exist. Men measure seconds by how close death feels. The radio falls silent again. Not a single word from those in front. Communication denied, answers withheld. Rules continue, but questions multiply. The loader speaks softly. We move without orders. They court us. The gunner doesn't speak. He only watches Halperin's foot. Convoy engines idle behind them, each one part of a necessary heartbeat. The artery of movement waits for a signal no one has strength to give. Logistics holds war together. Stillness tears it apart. Halperin inhales the confined air. Oil, metal, heat. His mind reduces everything into a simple equation. Obey and lose many. Disobey and risk few. A tank built for combat asks nothing but forward motion. Every machine deserves purpose. Men ahead deserve more than rules. He hears another scream. Short. Cut away. Silence returns. It demands a reply. The fog hides the cost of waiting. The order protects rank. Instinct protects life. Halperin's foot lowers a fraction. Not enough to move, enough to decide. A question forms, not spoken, not shared, only lived. What is a tank for if not to move when others fall? Would you have chosen orders over lives? Halperin exhales once. No words, no countdown. His foot lowers fully onto the throttle. The Sherman answers with force. Steel gears mesh. The engine transitions from idle into power. 30 tons of armor commit to motion. The sudden forward surge feels like truth, finally allowed to move. Inside the hull, inertia throws the crew back into their seats. The loader curses under his breath. The gunner snaps his hands into position, bracing against the shock. Training overrides hesitation. Every man inside returns to practiced instinct. Doubt becomes secondary to survival. The fog breaks in irregular pockets as the tank advances. Each gap reveals fragments of a battlefield aligning itself. Halperin spots the first confirmation. The low rectangular shield of a Pak-40 anti-tank gun planted directly across the road. Perfect elevation. Perfect range? It was built to kill tanks exactly
German operators
like his. Pivot instinctively, trying to correct for the unexpected angle of approach. Their machine was prepared for a stationary target, not a tank closing distance with decisive speed. The gap between steel grows smaller by the second. Rifle fire cracks against the Sherman's turret. The rounds ping off hardened armor. Harmless noise against a moving decision. Halperin accelerates. Treads churn through mud, spitting torn earth behind them. Forward momentum turns the tank into a blunt command. Speed becomes shield. There is no time for precision gunnery. No time for elevation adjustments. The battlefield turns into direct collision. At 20 yards, the Pak-A gun crew makes one last attempt to fire. They adjust elevation. The barrel dips. The loader reaches for a shell. But motion defeats calculation. A static line cannot outguess advancing mass. The Sherman strikes. The sound is not explosive. It is metallic collapse. A scream of steel stretched past tolerance. The Pak-A gun's shield buckles inward before the carriage splinters. Timber legs shatter under the weight. The weapon flips and twists aside. A broken limb torn from the shoulder joint of German defense. Operators dive away, rolling over churned soil. They scramble for new cover, but the momentum of the tank leaves them behind. Halperin drives through the wreckage, letting the force of movement clear the path. He does not fire a single round. The machine itself is the weapon. Mud streaks across the hull. The tank continues forward several yards before Halperin reduces throttle. Not a full stop, just enough to register change. The loader peers toward the right view slit. The gunner mutters confirmation. The Pak-A gun is silent. Its angle no longer threatens anyone. Behind the tank, the fog hangs differently now. The infantry who had retreated seconds earlier stare upward from the ground. Their screams have stopped, not from shock of injury, from relief that feels too sudden to process. Their protection has arrived not through orders, but through motion. The convoy begins to roll behind Halperin's tank. One truck, then another. The artery reopens. Logistics pulse forward again. Inside the hull, the crew regains breath. No cheering, no praise. Only the return of routine necessities. Checking gauges, scanning fog, preparing for whatever stands next in line. Rules mattered before. Now results exist. A system built on caution is saved by a single engine refusing stillness. Forward motion keeps men alive. Infantry who had braced for annihilation now rise from the soil. Mud clings to uniforms, but breath returns. They advance cautiously behind the Sherman's rear hull, using the shattered Pak-A gun as fractured cover. Seconds ago, that weapon promised their end. Now it is their shield. Halperin sees none of their faces clearly, only fleeting silhouettes moving through the gray. Their rifles lift with renewed direction. The radio, silent moments earlier, bursts into competing voices. Strain mixes with disbelief. A fragment breaks through clearly. German line broken. Another, Convoy cleared to move. Efficiency replaces panic. Units previously separated reconnect in fast relay. Halperin listens without comment. The results speak for themselves. The cause remains unnamed. He hears a report of riflemen reaching a defensive fold along the road. Casualties appear fewer than feared. Medics shout coordinates for pickup instead of last rites. The artillery that threatened to measure their distance now fires sporadically, losing rhythm. The German position, surprised by motion, pulls back. The retreat leaves behind crates that were meant to sustain the ambush. Ammunition, field gear, maps rolled and abandoned in haste. Proof that the enemy planned to cut the artery, not just scratch at it. Behind Halperin, the convoy rolls forward. Truck by truck, the flow resumes. Engines rumble in uneven unison. The pulse of logistics returns. If supply lines are the bloodstream of armies, this is circulation restored. No celebration, only momentum. Relief in the form of movement. Halperin continues forward at a controlled pace. He does not let the tank settle back into idling. Stillness breeds doubt. The hull vibrates from the stress of impact. Bolts hold, but he feels every complaint in the steel. Machines pay for decisions. He listens for signs of internal strain. Transmission noise, track tension, engine temperature. The Sherman absorbed force meant to stop it. For now, it remains reliable. The crew inside perform checks with quiet discipline. No one talks about what they avoided. The gunner inspects bearings. The loader adjusts ready shells. The radio operator tries to strengthen contact with command. Routine returns like breath after cold water. They know that praise rarely arrives where orders were broken. Ahead, infantry slow their advance long enough to glance at the tank that led them out. They do not wave. They simply acknowledge the presence of armor where armor should have been all along. Their silence contains gratitude without ceremony. Halperin views the road ahead. Fog still hides distance. The battalion continues deeper into contested ground, protected by a lead plate of steel that refused to wait. He thinks about the court-martial promised over the radio. The threat feels distant now, smaller than the cost of obedience would have been. Regulations remain. Lives remain too. The system rarely highlights a single gear. Victory credits the machine, not the man who kept it turning. Halperin knows his role. Invisible success. He accepts that survival for many will never attach his name to their story. Screams once defined this field. Their absence is the only reward required. Silence becomes confirmation that instinct was correct. Halperin moves with conviction. Behind him, the war breathes again. Would anyone have known if he chose not to move? By late afternoon, the fog thins and reveals the churned ground behind them. The Sherman rolls back into the staging area at reduced speed. The machine that carried a battalion's survival now shows its strain. Scratched plates, dented fenders, dried mud hardened into ribs along the tracks. The engine idles with a rasp that betrays the collision's force. Halperin keeps the controls steady until the tank settles into its parking slot. The engine sighs into silence. Officers approach immediately. Their uniforms remain crisp, untouched by the mud outside the perimeter. Expressions remain controlled. Their anger is professional, not emotional. One speaks first, delivering the conclusion already decided. Regulations violated, operational risk introduced without authorization, potential damage to irreplaceable equipment. They cite codes, paragraph numbers, exact subclauses covering insubordination under combat conditions. Halperin stands at attention, posture rigid. He offers a direct account. No embellishment. No mention of screams in the fog or artillery finding range. He keeps his report factual. Movement initiated. Paquet position neutralized. Convoy freed to advance. He describes events as machine actions. Tank moved. Obstacle removed. Supply restored. There is no argument, only facts. Court-martial speculation appears among staff officers. A few voices lower to whispers as casualty numbers update across the field. The expected toll fails to arrive. Men who should have been lost remain alive. Field medics confirm fewer body bags than planning estimates predicted. Those numbers shift tone. Whispers dissipate. The official reprimand remains, but punishment softens under weight of survival. The phrase, unauthorized forward movement, stays on the record. The phrase, saved an entire company, does not appear in print. Later, one commander pulls Halperin aside. The conversation occurs quietly, away from the staging line. His tone is even, clipped. He repeats the instruction that defined the morning. Next time, wait. Two words following carry a different meaning. Good instincts. Neither phrase expands. The officer leaves before acknowledgement can form, a warning paired with reluctant respect. Halperin logs the reprimand. He knows medals follow visibility, not necessity. Machines operate without applause. Men who keep them moving learn the same discipline. He accepts the consequence as part of the task he chose. Action when hesitation would kill. Silence when recognition would complicate. Inside the tank later that evening, the crew checks the hull for structural compromise. The loader traces the bent edge of a plate, muttering about what could have happened had they hesitated. The gunner offers a quiet remark. "We moved because you did." He returns to inspecting elevation gears without waiting for response. Their trust requires no formal acknowledgement. The tank receives minor repairs. Fuel is replenished. Ammunition restocked. By nightfall, it looks like any other vehicle preparing for another advance. The field holds no marker identifying what happened hours earlier. Machinery forgets impacts once stress is welded away. Halperin sits briefly against the hull, listening to small pops of cooling metal. He hears distant trucks repositioning. The system continues forward. That is the only confirmation he needs that the choice was correct. Results replace justification. Officers return to charts. Infantry return to new positions. The convoy prepares for the next push inland. A single Sherman driver folds into the machine once again, his record amended but unchanged where it matters most. A debt remains, not owed to Halperin, but carried quietly by those who survived without knowing why. Years pass. The Anzio beachhead shifts from lived memory into a line inside operational summaries. The battle's significance is measured in miles gained, casualties avoided, tonnage delivered ashore. Reports show improvement in supply flow that day. They do not show why. They reduce danger to percentages and survival to arithmetic. A single tank's movement becomes untraceable inside charts where outcomes matter more than origins. No medal is listed beside Corporal James Halperin's name. The formal record maintains only what can be standardized: his violation, his reprimand, his continued service afterward. The paperwork remembers disobedience. It does not record what was prevented. It does not archive the screams that stopped because a machine advanced when others waited. The silence of saved men remains the only enduring testimony. Infantry who survived that morning continue their lives. Some return home, build families, and later explain they lived through Anzio. They do not mention a Sherman they never saw clearly, but unknowingly, they carry a fragment of that decision. Lives extended because steel refused paralysis. That is the quiet inheritance of logistics. Victories arrive through systems that move unseen beneath the visible fight. Halperin finishes his service with the same steady routine he carried through combat. He transfers his skills back into civilian machinery, factories, vehicle depots, repair shops. He cleans tools with slow, precise strokes, a ritual from the war preserved in peace. He trusts motion, maintenance, and discipline more than speeches or recognition. Every engine he repairs becomes another reminder. A machine's worth is proven through its ability to move when motion matters. History often credits strategy crafted in headquarters. But battles also depend on mechanics inside cramped compartments who understand what a machine must do when hesitation threatens collapse. A supply line is not a theory. It is metal, fuel, bearings, and men making choices under pressure. Industry does not exist to preserve itself. It exists to push forward. The Sherman that struck the Paquet gun is eventually reassigned, later returned to depots, and one day removed from service. The dent from impact remains faint beneath paint layers. Welders note it as stress damage and move on. No inscription marks the reason that plate bent. The machine disappears into the flow of replacements, its past sealed under new steel. Halperin keeps working. He does not speak often of the reprimand. He does not defend himself against history's omissions. He knows survival for others was the only outcome that mattered. Systems improved because a single operator chose to act before permission arrived. Logistics rarely earns monuments. It functions like veins beneath armor, hidden, constant, carrying life to where it is needed. Wars are remembered through iconic offensives and named commanders, but they are won when movement continues, in places where hesitation should have ended it. The legacy of the machine that refused silence lives in the simple truth Halperin carried. Sometimes the safest order is the one that breaks the rule designed for different moments. Sometimes survival demands motion. Would you have kept 30 tons of purpose waiting in the fog? February 12, 1942. Hartford, Connecticut's now came without sound. Thick, orderly flakes settling across the roofs of the Colt Machine Division. Inside, the assembly floor carried its own weather. Heat from furnaces, hiss of airlines, the dry rattle of conveyors running before sunrise. The clock on the far wall read 05:47. Steel racks cast long shadows through the steam. Every motion was measured. The torque of a wrench, the hiss of coolant, the metallic breath of the test rig under voltage. Lucas Weiss stood beside it, collar buttoned to the throat, breath visible in the factory air. 41 years old. Immigrant. Engineer. His face carried the same tension as the steel he tested. Fixed, restrained, enduring. The machine before him pulsed with low current. The new rifle bolt carrier, stripped to its bare mechanism, cycled forward and back with mechanical patience. A leak in the steam line hissed like a warning. He watched the gauge needle tremble. Then he saw it. A thin fracture line, hair wide, running through the tempered surface. Not a crack yet, but the beginning of one. Invisible unless the light struck exactly. He leaned closer. The sound around him flattened. Turbines, chains, the whistle of a distant freight leaving the yard. The order from the night before was clear. No more delays. Production must continue. Every crate packed and loaded by the 15th. Shipments bound for the docks, then the Atlantic. Rifles for an army he would never see. He turned the form over in his hand, the authorization to proceed. The pencil waited above the signature block. The foreman, red-eyed from the night shift, stood a few paces back, pretending to check his clipboard. Men along the line worked without pause, unaware of the decision forming at the test rig. Steam gathered on the overhead glass, dripping in slow rhythm. The hum of the turbines deepened, a sound that filled the ribs. In that vibration lived the system. Belts, trucks, ports, convoys, each relying on the last. If one stopped, all slowed. If one man hesitated, 1,000 rifles waited in silence. Lucas exhaled. He thought of the trains outside, already coupling in the fog. Freight marked for New York Harbor. Crates labeled for the 29th Infantry, British Lend-Lease. The movement of steel across oceans depended on this signature. He adjusted the lamp and studied the fracture again. Barely visible. Could be nothing. Could be everything. He had seen this once before. A winter test in Brno, 1937. A similar fault, small as a hairline, but when stress came, the mechanism locked, and a man lost his hand. He still remembered the sound, not the scream, the sound of metal jamming before it failed. He looked up. The foreman nodded, impatient. The pencil tip touched the paper, then paused. Somewhere down the line, a gearbox stalled for half a second, belt slipping, then caught again. The system corrected itself. The rhythm resumed. Lucas set the pencil down. He reached for the intercom switch. Static filled the air. He spoke once, quiet even, requesting the supervisor. A decision had been made. By nightfall, word reached management. Production halted for inspection. The delay cost 18 hours. No reprimand was written, no commendation given. The rifles shipped one day late, but none failed under fire. Weeks later, an officer from Ordnance visited Hartford. He shook Lucas's hand, said nothing else. In wartime, silence was often the only form of recognition. Years passed. The machines changed. The plant emptied. Snow still fell across the roof where the steam once rose. Somewhere, a rifle stamped with that day's serial number sits clean, unjammed. The system moved on. But one man, one moment, kept its clockwork intact. Would you have turned the wheel? Before the war, Lucas Weiss built turbines for municipal power in Brno. Machines that turned steadily, hour after hour, without complaint. He spoke little, moved with care, and never raised his voice above the hum of a motor. His workbench smelled of oil and graphite. On its edge, a line of pocket watches lay open, each in a different stage of repair. He fixed them in silence, winding them until their ticking synchronized. Precision was not a habit to him. It was a way of staying steady in a world that kept changing speed. When Czechoslovakia fell, he packed a single design folder and crossed the Atlantic under contract. A new name on a foreign payroll. In Hartford, he lived above a bakery where the walls shook slightly each dawn as the ovens fired. He timed his morning walk to the 0610 freight that passed 3 streets over, carrying brass and rubber toward the coast. He would stop, count the wagons, and continue. Routine as compass, order as language. At the factory, Lucas kept his tools lined in sequence. Wrenches by size, files by wear, calipers polished clean. He logged every measurement twice, first in pencil, then in ink. The others on the line called him the Czech and left him to his silence. They laughed when he refused to eat with his hands still dirty from graphite. When he refiled a part, others would have passed inspection on. But the inspectors noted his precision. His signature on test reports always landed at the same minute as the production clock's second sweep. The plant around him moved like an organism. Heat, rhythm, noise. The presses dropped, lifted, dropped again. Sparks drifted through the air like small insects, settling on the concrete. The turbines in the basement carried the pulse of the building. He often stood above them, feeling their vibration travel through his shoes. To him, the sound was trust. A machine's word was the only one he believed. Still, the war changed the arithmetic. What began as numbers on paper became quantities of steel and powder. Then units of rifles bound for a continent he no longer recognized. He checked each bolt carrier for tolerance, micrometer turning under his fingers. But lately, his mind drifted to the hands that would hold them. Soldiers, nameless, somewhere in the snow. He tried not to imagine their faces. Yet at night, when the factory quieted and the cranes moved above the empty floor, the thought returned with the same weight as the steel. He remembered his father's workshop in Brno, the same smell of oil and iron, the same rule, measure twice, cut once, never guess. His father used to say precision was not about pride, but respect for the material. Metal forgives nothing. The lesson remained even here, where the machines built weapons instead of turbines. Each morning he signed the production logs, his handwriting steady, his conscience less so. The rifles left the plant in sealed crates, their serial numbers marching in order. Somewhere in that sequence, Lucas began to see not progress, but consequence. He still believed in systems, in their cold, reliable logic. But lately, He wondered if efficiency was the same as virtue, or only its echo. Would you have trusted the system? By 1942, the Hartford plant was one node among thousands, a single pulse in a continent-wide circuit. Railheads from Illinois, foundries in Pittsburgh, assembly lines in Detroit, all feeding east toward the ports. Rifles were not weapons anymore. They were counted by freight weight, recorded by serial, shipped by tonnage, each one part of a living schedule that stretched from warehouse floor to battlefield trench. Inside the plant, the air carried the scent of oil and molten metal. Pistons thumped beneath the concrete. Cranes drifted overhead, their chains swaying in rhythm. Every sound had purpose. Every movement was timed to the second. Cartridges were measured not in pieces, but in tons. Rifles moved in trainloads. The language of war had become numerical. On the drafting wall, Lucas kept the production charts pinned in rows. Output quotas, transport schedules, failure tolerances, and shipment frequencies. Each chart marked in pencil with updates. He knew the figures without looking. The distance from Hartford to Liverpool. The average crossing time of convoy HX series freighters. The percentage lost to U-boat patrols between Greenland and Ireland. Numbers reduced uncertainty, but they also erased faces. He understood the system the way a machinist understands a lathe. Through sound, rhythm, resistance. The arsenal of democracy, the newspapers called it. Lucas never used the phrase. To him, it felt less like democracy and more like a nervous system. Oil for blood, gears for thought, men for nerves. Each department dependent on the next. If one valve jammed, the pressure built elsewhere. By early February, the pace had reached breaking speed. Trucks idled in the yard, waiting to be loaded before the noon express. Boilers ran without pause. The assembly crews worked 12-hour shifts. The foreman's clipboard filled with check marks, none of them meaning rest. The entire plant moved like a single organism that could not sleep. Lucas walked the inspection floor each morning before the whistle. He watched the conveyors crawl past, receivers, bolts, trigger assemblies, every piece destined for a weapon whose owner would never know this room existed. He ran a hand along the cooling barrels, feeling the faint warmth of friction. To him, they were not instruments of violence, but evidence of coordination. Thousands of hands aligned. Elsewhere, boxcars clattered east. In New Jersey, dock cranes lifted crates into Liberty ships under blackout. In Chicago, presses stamped casings by the million. No unit moved alone. The continent itself had become a factory. Lucas recorded the morning data in the ledger. 1,824 rifles completed, 48 rejected, 2 missing from count. Acceptable loss margin, 0.11%. He signed nothing. The line beneath his name remained blank. The fracture he had seen days before still haunted his calculations. A thin weakness invisible in the ledgers, but present in memory. He knew the truth. The system did not break from chaos, but from obedience too perfect to question. Somewhere in this vast rhythm, a single defective bolt could become the ghost in the machine. The noon whistle sounded. Steam bled from the vents. Workers moved on cue. The plant continued its cycle. Lucas folded the report, unsigned, and placed it in the outbox. By nightfall, the trains departed. The line kept moving. The system, alive and indifferent, endured. By March, the air in the plant had changed. The cold had lifted, but something else hung there. Not dust, not steam, but unease. Reports began to drift through the corridors like vapor. Field units in North Africa. Rifles locking after extended fire. No one said failure. The official memo blamed sand, heat, poor maintenance. Still, the rumor carried weight. In factories, words moved slower than machines, but they never stopped. Lucas received the memo folded inside a shipment log. He read it twice, then went back to his bench. The test rig hummed, steady as always. Yet when he checked the new batch, he saw it again. The same thin fracture line, barely visible until the light caught it. Same pattern, same batch number. The steel came from a new supplier, approved during February to meet volume demands. A cheaper alloy, substituted without full testing. Efficiency had swallowed caution. He filled out a request for inspection. 3 pages, exact figures, no opinion. The reply came back the next morning. 1 line typed in black ribbon ink. Production must continue. Outside, snow had turned to gray water. Freight cars stood in rows along the siding, idling under drizzle, each one marked with stenciled codes. RD 742B, Dest, Norfolk. Condensation gathered on the couplings and ran down the rivets like sweat. Steam drifted from the locomotive vents in slow rhythm. Inside, the assembly line resumed its measured pace. The sound was almost perfect, almost symmetrical. But Lucas began to notice small irregularities. The under-lubricated click of a press that caught before it cycled. A conveyor that hesitated half a second before engaging. A torque wrench that no longer reset to 0. Tiny failures, invisible in the ledgers, but audible to those who listened. He wrote each one in his logbook. Date, time, anomaly, no commentary. Pages filled, neat columns of quiet warnings. Every evening, as the plant emptied, he stayed behind. The turbines continued their low whine, echoing in the metal rafters. He stood near the test bench, reading his notes. Each line of ink felt heavier than the last. He had built his life around precision, clean data, measurable results. Now, the evidence existed, but no one would act. The system was designed to absorb friction, not truth. Shipments left on schedule. Trucks to rail, rail to port, port to convoy. The rifles bore his inspection mark, the small LW stamped beneath the sight base. Somewhere, across the ocean, men were cleaning those weapons under desert sun, trusting the steadiness of a craftsman they would never meet. Their lives depended on tolerances measured in fractions of a millimeter. Lucas lay awake above the bakery, the floor faintly vibrating from the rail yard beyond the river. The turbine's whine lived in his ears long after work ended. He thought of the fracture line, not visible but waiting. He asked himself whether silence could still count as loyalty. No one around him seemed to ask. In wartime, questioning the system felt like breaking it. Yet he knew the machine had limits. Even steel had a point where stress became failure. The difference was only time. By April, his logbook contained 47 entries of irregularities. None had been answered. The plant kept moving, precise, unbothered. The trains kept leaving. He began to wonder which would break first, the rifles or the silence. Would you have stayed quiet? April arrived with clearer skies and heavier trains. The snowmelt turned the rail yard to mud, but the freights still rolled, iron wheels cutting through the gray. Each one carried crates stamped with the same markings, the same promise: continuity. The plant gates opened before dawn, workers filing in with lunch tins and thermos cups, each man a rhythm in the larger machine. The siren blew once. Work resumed. On Lucas's desk lay a sealed envelope, official, thick paper, typed in black ribbon. The directive was clear: do not halt production without authorization. He read it 3 times, tracing the letters as if the ink itself carried authority. Orders came from Washington, translated through offices, clipped to memos, and handed down until they landed here. A man, a bench, a decision. Procedure was not questioned. It was followed. For most of his life, Lucas had found comfort in that order. The rulebook was the same in every country: measure, report, obey. It was a system of logic immune to noise. But lately, the logic felt thinner. The fracture lines were back. Not 1, not 2, several, all from the same lot. The same cheap alloy, the same heat signature. No misreadings, not coincidence, pattern. He logged the findings quietly, date and lot number, as always. Then he stopped. His pencil hovered over the margin. The word recurrence came to mind, but he did not write it. He closed the logbook and sat still, listening. Around him, the plant kept breathing, a steady inhalation of labor and steel. The presses struck in rhythm. The turbines hummed. The air smelled of carbon and cutting fluid. The system, alive in its own way, moved without thought. Workers trusted the process. Lucas trusted the metal. The difference between them was only the sound of hesitation. He began to think of alternatives. A small adjustment. Nothing drastic. Nothing visible. The tempering schedule could be shifted by a fraction of a degree, just enough to strengthen the steel without requiring approval. It would mean rewriting the process card. A violation, technically, but so small it might pass unnoticed. The idea lodged in his mind like a bearing that refused to seat. He considered the risk with mechanical calm. One change, if discovered, could mean dismissal. If ignored, the fractures could multiply, invisible until stress found them. The equation was simple. The outcome, not. Outside, a train horn sounded, long and low. He pictured the rifles loaded in the boxcars, stacked in crates, each stamped with his initials beneath the sight mount. Across the ocean, some would jam before firing their third round. Others would not. A margin of error, acceptable on paper, fatal in practice. When he closed his eyes, he saw a soldier's hands gripping a frozen rifle, bolt locked mid-battle. Not imagination, engineering. A simulation of failure played in silence. It did not frighten him. It persisted, mechanical and precise, refusing to leave. By afternoon, Lucas walked the production line again. Slow steps, counting rhythm, watching the metal flow through the process he had helped design. The rational path was obedience, but rationality, he realized, was not the same as truth. At his station, he took the process card, erased the existing number, and wrote a new one, half a degree higher. Barely visible. A change so small it might go unnoticed, or alter the outcome of thousands. He replaced the card, closed his logbook, and left the bench without looking back. The turbines droned, indifferent. The plant continued its breath. It began at 02 ice. The plant was half dark, half awake. A hum under concrete, the slow rhythm of machinery left running through the night. Maintenance hours were routine, unobserved. Steam bled from the valves and curled through the rafters, a slow drift that hid motion. Lucas moved through it with deliberate pace, his clipboard folded beneath his arm. He knew which furnace to reach, which gauge to ignore. The flame burned steady, its color a muted orange. He unlocked the control panel, hands blackened from graphite dust. The adjustment would take seconds. Half a degree, not more, enough to shift the structure of the alloy, tighten the grain, eliminate the flaw. On paper, no difference. In metal, everything. He turned the wheel slightly. The valve hissed once, then steadied. The new temperature settled without alarm. The operator on duty sat against a crate, coat pulled up, half asleep. To him, the dials showed nothing unusual. Lucas watched the numbers climb in slow increments, the rise so measured it could pass as drift. Industrial systems moved like this, quiet, obedient, massive. They noticed only large errors, never small corrections. He stayed beside the furnace while the heat built. Each degree took time. The air grew heavier, sharp with iron oxide and burnt oil. Drops of condensation gathered along the pipes and fell to the floor, vanishing in the dust. The glow deepened, then leveled. Inside, the metal changed color, faintly, like breath fading on glass. By 04:30, he began the cool-down. The hiss softened. The motors wound down. The test bolts were withdrawn, still red, cooling under a thin film of powdered grit. Lucas marked their position, their batch code, and waited. He didn't pace. He watched. The color dimmed through red, then brown, then gray. No cracking, no shift. The surface held smooth. stable. When dawn came, the first whistles sounded from the yard. Workers filed in, boots echoing over wet concrete. The foreman arrived with a clipboard, yawning, stamping his gloves. He glanced at the gauges, signed the sheet, and moved on. Everything was within range. Lucas's process card sat on the same hook as before. Unchanged. Officially. Production resumed by 07 Sacru. Conveyors engaged, presses locked into rhythm. Crates rolled down the line, labels pasted, sealed. Nothing appeared different. But in the heart of the system, the correction had taken hold. A deviation hidden beneath compliance. Outside, drizzle hung low over the freight yard. Trains idled under fog, their steel sides glinting faintly. A crane shifted, couplers clanked, sparks struck from wet rails like flint against stone. Lucas stood by the loading dock as the last car connected. The wheels began their slow roll east toward the coast. The sound was hollow, deliberate, final. He didn't feel victory, only the precision of completion. The act had been both forbidden and necessary. One the system would neither record nor forgive. In the ledger, everything remained exact. By noon, the furnaces burned again, steady, indifferent. He filed the logbook under the same date, same signature. No marks, no hesitation. History continued its rhythm, blind, efficient, unknowing. Weeks passed. The factory's rhythm did not change. Boilers fired, presses struck, trains departed under the same gray weather. To the men on the line, every day looked like the one before. But far beyond Hartford, something had shifted. A signal came through military channels scattered by static. The clerk at the telegraph desk logged it without interest. A convoy had reached Liverpool. No ships lost, cargo intact. The message carried no commentary, only tonnage and arrival time. Another sheet followed hours later. Field performance report, small arms division. Operational reliability restored. 2 sentences, unsigned. In Hartford, the memo arrived folded inside a shipment manifest. Routine correspondence. Lucas unfolded it at his station, the graphite still dark on his hands. He read the words twice. They were neutral, administrative, but behind them he recognized the shape of consequence. The rifles were holding. The alloy no longer fractured. Somewhere in North Africa, men he would never meet had pulled their triggers and lived. No one in the plant mentioned the issue again. The earlier complaints had vanished from correspondence, erased by procedure. The defective steel lot was closed out, its supplier code replaced in silence. Even the production charts showed no irregularity. The system, self-correcting, had rewritten its own history. By afternoon, new crates were loaded for the next transport. Forklifts moved between platforms, tires leaving damp tracks. The cranes clanked overhead. The rhythm resumed, indifferent, efficient, whole. Lucas watched the flow for a moment, then returned to his desk. He signed the inspection sheet with the same steady hand. His initials carried no weight now. The paper, once alive with numbers, seemed only to confirm his invisibility. At night, the housing block trembled as freight trains passed. Each wheel strike echoed through the pipes and into the walls. He lay awake, listening. The sound stretched outward, into distance, toward ports, convoys, and fields where fog lay over silent barrels. Somewhere across that span of steel and ocean, his adjustment lived its quiet life. There was no reward, no reprimand. The act existed outside language, like a gear turning inside a sealed machine. The system neither thanked nor punished. It absorbed. It moved on. He returned to the plant each morning. Same walk, same coat. The same graphite stain that never seemed to wash completely away. The machines greeted him with their usual pulse, steady and absolute. Yet inside that pulse, a faint difference remained. Not in rhythm, but in meaning. The war's machinery, vast and unfeeling, had been altered by one human deviation. A single forbidden correction that the records would never name. Elsewhere, ships unloaded, rifles stacked, convoys formed again under gray sky. The great industrial organism kept breathing, unaware that a single man had saved its rhythm from fracture. History recorded only the success of supply. No one asked why the failures stopped. No one looked for the moment a hand turned a wheel against instruction. Lucas filed the report, closed the ledger, and went back to work. The machine endured. The silence held. Would you have done the same? By July, the plant had reached full tempo. The furnaces burned clean, the presses timed to the second. Workers moved in practiced loops, measured, wordless, precise. Nothing in the air suggested an investigation, yet word traveled before the man arrived. The inspector came from Washington. His uniform was immaculate, his questions routine. He moved between departments with a clipboard and stopwatch, recording temperatures, quotas, and safety compliance. At Lucas's station, he paused. A glance over the gauges, a tap on the logbook. One question, procedural, harmless. Then a brief silence as he scanned the records, his pencil still. He closed the ledger without remark and moved on. By noon, he was gone. The factory resumed its rhythm as if the interruption had been a passing vibration. But in the days that followed, small adjustments appeared. Oversight tightened. Reports became double-signed. Materials were verified at every stage. And one morning, Lucas's assignment changed. He was instructed to train new machinists. No reprimand, no commendation. His workbench was relocated to a corner near the freight doors, close enough to feel the cold draft when they opened. He didn't protest. He set his tools on the new bench, aligned them by size, and began again. The sound from the main hall reached him through layers of echo. A mechanical sea, endless and exact. He spoke little, taught by gesture, corrected by example. Trains still departed nightly. Boxcars sealed with stenciled codes. The rifles they carried gleamed under inspection lights. Flawless now, the steel exact. The defect was gone. The system had corrected itself. The foreman passed him sometimes on inspection rounds. Their exchanges were brief. A nod, nothing more. Not approval, not warning. Just acknowledgement, measured and neutral. In a place ruled by production charts, that was enough. Lucas understood the message. The machine survived by forgetting the hands that repaired it. Still, he kept his private record. Not an admission, not a confession, only observations. He wrote in clean lines, the same precision he applied to steel. Tolerance achieved, structural integrity confirmed. Lesson: precision without conscience equals failure. The words were technical, but the meaning wasn't. Weeks became months. The war widened. The Atlantic convoys grew larger, their cargo lists longer. Hartford increased output again. New recruits filled the floor, learning from Lucas the way he once learned from diagrams. Method without question, rule without story. His name drifted from reports. He became part of the machinery he once defied. Outside, the river carried the reflection of smokestacks into the dusk. Inside, the presses beat on. A rhythm that no longer needed him, but still bore his signature, hidden in process tolerances in the steel that did not fail. History would remember generals, not machinists, medals, not maintenance. Yet, inside the sound of engines and rivets, a trace of his decision remained. Quiet, unseen, indestructible. He finished his log for the night, closed the cover, and wiped his hands clean. The graphite smudge never left. After the war, the plant changed its rhythm. The furnaces cooled, the presses stood silent for a week, and the smell of oil thinned from the air. Then new orders arrived. Peacetime contracts, civilian models, kitchen appliances, the same machines, retooled, the same hands, now turning bolts meant for homes instead of front lines. By winter, the military markings were painted over. Crates once bound for convoys now carried spare parts for automobiles. The War Departments sent closing statements, inventory reconciliations, and production summaries. None contained the name Lucas. Somewhere in the conversion, his personnel record was absorbed into the new structure. The nationality column was revised. The employment date blurred between departments. On paper, he became a trace without an origin. He left Hartford quietly. No ceremony, no farewell. By train, he moved east, carrying a single case of tools. In New Jersey, he rented a small workshop near the railway yard. There, he repaired clocks and pocket watches for neighbors who never asked where he had learned such precision. They brought him pieces with broken springs, warped gears, frozen balance wheels. He worked slowly, unhurried, his hands remembering metal as if it still held the weight of wartime steel. Elsewhere, the rifles continued their long service. Many were scrapped, others stored in depots, a few preserved in collections. Decades softened their edges. The bluing faded, the stocks darkened. Yet deep inside the receivers, the corrected alloy held. The structure remained sound, uncorroded. Each weapon carried an unseen lineage. The moment one engineer had altered a furnace setting by half a degree, refusing to let failure repeat, in National Archives, the design was filed under domestic modification, origin unverified. The description was brief, factual, uncurious. Future historians would skim the line, seeing only administrative shorthand. They would never know it marked the hinge of survival for countless soldiers who once trusted the weapon's trigger. Lucas aged quietly, his workshop filled with the rhythm of ticking clocks, mechanical hearts keeping civilian time. Sometimes, when the night trains passed, their rumble brought back the memory of the factory's pulse. He would pause, listen, then return to his work. He kept no medals, no photographs. Only a single notebook survived him, its final page left unfinished. The world moved on. The factory was demolished, replaced by a storage complex. The war receded into museums and documentaries. But the steel endured, in relics, in fragments, in the alloy that never failed. Industrial history records systems, not choices. It measures output, not conscience. Yet every vast mechanism depends on one small deviation. The moment a worker, unseen, decides not to obey the flaw. The immigrant engineer who changed the furnace by half a degree remains unnamed. But the metal remembers.